Let's start with make sure we're coming in clean and then switch it to that. 1, 2, 1, 2. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Your brand I don't want to preempt anything. What we thought is that we would like to have just one topic as a group. Now that's not much topic, but we're going to speak about certain issues, but they'll fall under the umbrella of separation of church and state. Do you think that if it speaks if it gets the vote, would that be the main point?
Could be.
But, I mean, lots of people may say no, we want to vote on separate issue.
They could do. The convention.
It's up to them.
Just so you know, we can split dates and do 15, or we can do 2 weekends, then we can do 2. You know, so if we do a proper job with 2, then you do it.
I think that realistically, if we give the door got the impression that the issue will be addressed, the other things will just follow anyway. So we don't really need to say you need to do this, and this. It comes under one umbrella.
They'll call us. you ready to go? Happy? Let's see,
No, man, because, yeah.
Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to NUIG this evening. My name is Art O'Leary. I'm the Secretary to the Convention on the Constitution. I'm the guy who gets the blame if it all goes horribly wrong, so expect to see me in the newspapers at some point. I'd like to just maybe a couple of housekeeping issues before we start. Can you all turn off your mobile phones, if you wouldn't mind? I know people, it's irresistible to tweet on occasions like this, and there will be time, but apparently it plays havoc with the sound system, and we're streaming live this evening, and for those people who couldn't make it, apparently there's a bit of an audience who want to have a look at what we're doing here this evening. So to kick off proceedings, can I introduce Dr. Jim Brown, the President of the University, who will do the opening address. Thank you.
Siwr maha cordia, colacatha, agus íon speisialt agus gohóir go bhhaid an fáilte fé chur raibh cahirirlí agus bhuiil den Commission seo. So you're welcome to Galway and to NUI Galway on this rather wet, damp, wintry night, but great crowd and great to see people interested in the Constitution. I want to welcome especially Tom Arnold, the chairperson of the Convention, and indeed the members of the Convention, and good to have you in Galway. I want to also welcome people who are going to hopefully join us on the video stream worldwide, and you're welcome to Galway and welcome to this very fine event. Just to say a few words about the interest of this university in Bunrock na HÉireann. We have for a long time, I think, as an institution, through some of our colleagues going back many, many years, had quite, I would say, an influence on what's happened in Ireland and the Irish Constitution. If I go back to the 1980s, a time of great division, a time of great debate around the Constitution. That debate centred on a whole series of issues: divorce, contraception, abortion, etc. But also Northern Ireland. At the time there were two provisions, Articles 2 and 3, which were considered controversial. I think there were colleagues here in the School of Law who perhaps were before their time in terms of their assessment of those provisions and the thought that they put into how they might be dealt with. Some worked on, I think, particularly people like Kevin Boyle, may he rest in peace, who was at the time Professor of Law here, and his colleague now in Queen's University Belfast, Tom Haddon. They worked together at that time, I'm talking about the 80s, on what might happen in Ireland in the future. And they brought forward some ideas which I think subsequently found full expression in the Good Friday Agreement and the subsequent decision of the Irish people to amend the Constitution and to remove Articles 2 and 3. They were the people, I think, who first talked about a solution based on these islands rather than this island. And it's interesting how their work at that time, I think, found a real resonance and provided, I think, a real basis for some of the subsequent decisions, and very important decisions, which found expression ultimately in a change to our Constitution. I think also of my predecessor, Dr. Colm Mahocka, who many of you will know and will remember with great fondness, who also chaired the New Ireland Forum, and they're talking now back to the early 90s. I think also somebody who would have had some influence on what happened in Ireland subsequently. I think the New Ireland Forum perhaps isn't always given full credit for what the work that it did, but I think it also was important in terms of what happened subsequently. And up to the present day, our present Cathaoirleach of our governing authority, our Uachtaráis na Hoscaile, Catherine McGuinness, who's been very active in constitutional affairs, I would say. Somebody who also chaired the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation in the 1990s and went on, I think, to be a Supreme Court judge, President of the Law Reform Commission, and is somebody, I think, who certainly had an influence on our Constitution and perhaps was particularly influential in terms of the last year's referendum on children's rights, where she made some important contributions. I think all of these point to examples of where academics and indeed others in the university I think have made a difference and have influenced the direction of constitutional thought in the country. Right up to this day, I can mention, for example, our UNESCO Chair of Children, Youth and Civic Engagement, Professor Pat Dolan, who I think was very instrumental behind the scenes and very influential in terms of the work that he did to inform the thinking behind the referendum earlier this year on children's rights. Some of his work, I think, was really important in the context of how that constitutional amendment was framed and, of course, subsequently carried. Indeed, our work in those areas continues. The university has recently commenced the construction of a new facility for a life course institute. That institute will bring together individuals who are working in areas as diverse as disability law, social gerontology, and children's rights and children in difficult situations. That group, I think, also is involved in research and involved in policy work, which I think will also inform policy debate in Ireland and perhaps ultimately inform the work that's been done in our constitution. I think also Donogh himself, Donogh O'Connell, whom we'll hear from later on, people like Larry Donnelly in our School of Law, who have had I think a significant public impact as public intellectuals, discussing areas as diverse as the abolition of the Shannon last year, the referendum on the Court of Appeal, which was carried, of course, and the Oireachtas Inquiries referendum, if you remember that, in 2011, which was, of course, unsuccessful. All of those, I think, point to the university's commitment to constitutional law and involvement in the public debate and contribution to the public debate on that important topic. I should also say that the university runs an LLM, a master's in public law, led by Marie McGonigal, now in its 10th year. And that programme has been very attractive to students, but also has produced graduates and professionals who are now very active in many areas of legal endeavour. And of course we have a serious commitment around the area of human rights and disability law, which I think is well known and well recognised. I think all this finally, and this is my last point really, points to a university which is deeply engaged with its society and with its community, and who seeks to ensure that its research, particularly its research in terms of the social sciences, has an impact in terms of informing public policy debate and ultimately perhaps informing the direction of public policy and the framing of both legislation and the framing of instruments which bring forward, if you like, solutions to public policy issues. So with those few words, can I again say I'm delighted to be here this evening to welcome all of you to this debate, this discussion on the Constitution. Great to see such a crowd of people here, and you're all very welcome, and I hope we have a very enjoyable and a very productive discussion. Gurmina Mahi, thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Tom Arnold, who's your chairman for the evening.
Jim, thank you very much for that welcome, and it's really wonderful to be here in Galway. I did a short interview on the local radio this morning and said we started off very well last week in Cork, but that I hope that Galway would even surpass the numbers in Cork, and happily you have. So very, very good start. I just, in these few opening remarks, just talk a little bit about where we've got to in our work and then how the evening will be structured. But firstly, I do want to really thank Jim for his opening comments, and I think it's so appropriate that he has mentioned Kevin Boyle and Tom Haddon in particular, because there are people who mightn't be as well known as some of the other people he mentioned. But these two people were hugely important in the wake of the Anglo-Irish Agreement in the 1980s, writing really important material which, as you said, had a resonance to the future constitutional development of this country and relationships on this island. So in terms of our work, everybody, and all of you know here this evening, of course, that we start with the 1937 Constitution, for at least for our current purposes. And over the years, there's been a number of efforts made to re-look at that Constitution. In the late 1960s, a parliamentary committee chaired by the late George Colley did some important work, which led to some recommendations for change. In the 1990s, there was a very significant review of the whole Constitution under a committee led by Dr. T.K. Whittaker, very happily still with us. And subsequent to that, there were a number of reports from Oireachtas committees or parliamentary groups. But for a variety of reasons, there wasn't widespread action on the recommendations of any of these committees. So coming into the 2011 general election, all of the political parties had ideas of one sort or another to review the Constitution. And after the election and in the programme for government, there was then a commitment to set up a convention. And the convention was to comprise of 100 people, 66 citizens chosen to be representative of the population as a whole, 33 politicians, 4 from Northern Ireland, 29 from the Republic, and an independent chairman, myself. And we were asked to examine 8 specific issues And then a final issue, any other business. Now, of the 8 specific issues, we have already examined 7 of them and written reports on them. And they are, firstly, we examined the voting age, recommended that the voting age should be reduced from 18 years to 16. The length of the presidential term, which should it be reduced from 7 to 5, and the recommendation was no, 7 years should remain. We examined the article dealing with the role of women in the home and recommended that that should change. We examined the issue of same-sex marriage and recommended that there should be a change in the Constitution to facilitate same-sex marriage. We looked at the question of electoral reform, specifically our voting system, and recommended that the current voting system should remain, but that there were a range of other aspects of political reform which should be introduced, a lot of which would not require constitutional change. And the last issue we dealt with, which was in September, was the issue of whether Irish citizens living outside the state should have the right to vote in presidential elections. And again, by a substantial majority, recommended that right should be provided. Our final issue, which we deal with, and we'll deal with it this weekend, is the article in the Constitution dealing with blasphemy. And the question is whether or not this article should be retained, or whether it should be either deleted or modified. So that is, if you like, the substantive agenda of 8 issues that the government asked us to examine. In the case of each issue, we write a report. That report is deposited in the Houses of the Oireachtas, and the government, it has to be debated within 4 months of its deposition, and the government has to decide what to do about the recommendations of the report. And in today's news, you will see that the government is considering the report today and subsequently next week of what to do a report on same-sex marriage. So this will be in the news in the very close near future. So that is, if you like, the substance of what we've been doing up to now. But the final item we were asked to deal with was any other business. Any aspect of the Constitution that people believe should be changed, aspects that are already in the Constitution, or perhaps aspects that are not in the Constitution that should be introduced. And that's, if you like, the work. We would devote 2 full meetings to that in next February. And we felt, we have a lot of submissions already on many of these aspects, but we felt we wanted to engage directly with the public on this final issue of any other business. And that's why we're here tonight. We're here to listen to your ideas. We're going to have 8 meetings around the country. This is the second one. And we will have later on, we will have contributions from our 3 citizen members who are, if you like, local here, Mike Lane, Terry Cormacan and John Lardner, and they will, if you like, give you their sense of what it's been like to be a member of the convention, 3 of the 66 citizen members. But to give you a sense of the practical nuts and bolts of how we do our work, Art O'Leary, our excellent head of secretariat for the group, will give a brief introduction, and after that we'll go on to Professor Donegal O'Connell.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll be extremely brief here. We get a sense over the last 6 months or so that people are very curious about how we picked our citizens and how the convention works, etc. So I'll give you a very brief outline of how all the pieces fit together, and I'm happy to take questions at the end during our open session, if you like. I got a phone call about 18 months ago from the Secretary to the Government asking me would I like to be involved in the Convention on the Constitution, and I said to myself, well, it's 100 people in a room considering some issues very sensitive for Irish society. What could possibly go wrong? So as it happens, there are 117 things which can go wrong, all of which are written on a large whiteboard in my office. We'll start with the citizen members. I think the people are interested in those themselves. Our 66 citizens are supposed to be representative of Irish society in general. So we've got 33 men and 33 women. We've got 12 citizens under the age of 24. We've got 3 from Galway, and we've got 18 from Munster, and that's the way it is generally worked out. We have a proper proportion, about 14% of them are unemployed. We've got homemakers, and we've got architects, and we've got postmen, and construction workers, some of whom are unemployed as well at the moment. So they are literally the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. Each of our citizens has a substitute. So for our 28-year-old female engineer from Carlow, if she's not able to make a meeting because she has to go to a wedding or a funeral or something, there's a 32-year-old architect from Kilkenny to take her place. So that's the way that it works. You can imagine it's not a big ask, or it's certainly a big ask for individuals, because polling company knock on the door and say, listen, I've got a great idea. How would you like to give up 8 or 9 weekends of the year for no money to come and talk about issues of importance to Irish society? So for every 40 doors that were knocked on, we got 1 satisfactory response. So we're hoping that as the convention builds up its brand, that if you get a knock on the door, that you'll volunteer, and that we'll try and get more people involved, because engagement is the whole issue. This is all about reaching out to Irish society to get a view. The political system is interested in what you guys think about what the Constitution should be like. We run our meetings over a weekend. It's total immersion in a subject. The chairman mentioned that we're looking at the removal of the offence of blasphemy next weekend. So next weekend we'll have 100 people in a room who are going to listen to, over a day and a half, the greatest experts that we have in this country on the subject of blasphemy. Then we're going to hear from advocacy groups, some of whom are here this evening, Atheist Ireland and the Humanist Association, who I know will be anxious to speak later on. We'll hear on all sides of the argument. So our citizen members, over the course of 48 hours, will hear every possible idea and delve into layers and layers of the complexity of the issues. And I was very struck in Cork last week. One of our citizens spoke very touchingly about this. He said, so I'm a very confident person. I think I know an awful lot about a lot of these issues. But within minutes of sitting down at a convention meeting, I discovered how little I know about how important these things are, and the layers of complexity, etc. And I'm looking forward to hear Donica's view on some of these issues as well, because he's had a good look at the whole issue of constitutional reform and what's required to have a radical look at our convention, or our constitution. And I'm looking forward to that very much so. A couple of small points. All of our meetings are live streamed at constitution.ie. So if you can't attend the meeting, which most people can't, it's in a hotel in Malahide, we'd love for you to look in, dip in and out. We archive all the proceedings on our YouTube channel as well, constitution.ie. For the weekend where we discussed same-sex marriage, we had 20,000 viewers in 17 countries. So there is an interest out there, there's an appetite out there for this sort of thing, and we'd be very anxious that people would dip in and out. And finally, the convention members love to hear from the public. We can't do our work without you guys, and with your friends and your colleagues and everybody else as well. As the chairman mentioned, we're taking submissions on this Any Other Business module of the work programme. We have 500 and something submissions already. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got any idea at all in relation to your vision for Irish society, or what you think should be in the Constitution or shouldn't be in the Constitution, please let us know. It doesn't have to be a thesis. We've had, over the course of the year, a couple of thousand submissions, everything from a couple of lines to a thesis. So we're interested in your opinion. We read everything. So please get in touch, constitution.ie, and we'll be delighted. We're always very contactable as well. We're at the end of an email address or a phone line, so please get in touch. Happy to take questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Art. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Donica O'Connell.
Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful for the invitation to address this regional public meeting of the Convention on the Constitution. The chairman and members of the Convention are to be commended for taking the initiative of organising a series of regional meetings at which members of the public get the opportunity to interface with the Convention and to suggest topics for consideration beyond those already mandated by government. Of course, it will not be possible for the Convention to deal with all topics suggested in this phase of its work, but it's useful, I think, to test public opinion in this way. In order to open up this process, colleagues in NUI Galway have agreed to a limited live stream facility for tonight's proceedings. And I would very much like to thank them, Cormac, Liz, Zara and others who were involved in this, and indeed my colleague Charles O'Mahony, who did a lot of the organisation for this event. We were concerned that we mightn't have an audience tonight, but I don't know where that concern came from. It's an extraordinary turnout, even by Galway standards, and it makes me more nervous than I was, but even doubly so because Jim Fahey is in the audience, and that would make me nervous. It'd be nice maybe to welcome him back to NUI Galway and to public life. He's sitting in the back row. I've previously expressed some serious scepticism about the manner in which the Convention on the Constitution came into being, on its composition, and on the manner in which its agenda was drawn up by government. The basic premise of my concerns was that the Convention was a compromise too far on what was originally promised prior to the last general election, and that it would be incapable of any radical or holistic appraisal of the 1937 Constitution. I hold to those views, but feel compelled to acknowledge that the Convention has proven to be better than I had expected, with a more productive interaction between citizens and politicians than I and indeed others had predicted on those issues that it has considered to date. I have followed some of the proceedings of the Convention remotely and have been genuinely impressed by the manner in which it has dealt with constitutional issues of variable importance. In particular, I would like to pay tribute to Tom Arnold for the manner in which he has chaired the Convention, ensuring balance and inclusiveness while maintaining an appropriate level of order and civility. The Convention is very fortunate, I think, to have someone of his experience and ability in the chair. Looking now at the context of constitutional change, most commentators would now agree that the referendum process by which we change our constitution is unsatisfactory. Binary choices posited as answers to complicated questions that limit options crudely for often confused voters, and in which, in at times, robotic application of balance requirements can be applied by the broadcast media, have resulted, I think, in less than optimal referenda. I'm thinking of Nice 1, followed by Nice 2. I'm thinking of Lisbon 1, followed by Lisbon 2. I'm thinking of the citizenship referendum of 2004, the orchestration of which was unfortunate, and the low turnouts in the referenda on children's rights and more recently on Seanad abolition. One of the benefits of an entity, or indeed, as I would like to see it, a process like the Convention on the Constitution, is that it provides a space for considered and civilised deliberation and discourse on complicated constitutional questions outside of the typically febrile atmosphere of a hotly contested referendum. Good examples of this were the Convention's consideration of the question of marriage equality, and later its consideration of the position of women in the home under Article 41 of the Constitution. Now, even if this facet of the Convention is dismissed as being no more than a glorified focus group, it would be churlish not to acknowledge that this has some value in shaping and enriching public discourse. If we were to conceive of the Convention as a more permanent feature of our constitutional and political edifice, rather than as something to mark a particular constitutional moment or anniversary, we might in fact be using it to much greater effect. This would require some imagination and resourcefulness, as citizens would probably not be too keen on the idea of serving in a permanent capacity as members of an embedded convention or consultative assembly, but such practical difficulties could, I think, be addressed. In other words, what I'm arguing for is something that supplements representative democracy, not something that replaces it or is an alternative to it. Before dealing with the substantive constitutional issues that I believe the Convention should consider, I would like to say something about what I believe it should not consider, and that is Seanad reform in the aftermath of the rejection of the Seanad abolition proposal. Had the Convention been established in a different manner, with a more permissive approach to setting its own agenda and absent any preemptive decision on a Seanad abolition referendum, I have no doubt that it would have considered the question of bicameralism in the context of a more thoroughgoing analysis of executive accountability and parliamentary power. This was not possible, and for better or worse, the people have spoken in rejecting the government's proposal to abolish Seanad Éireann. Like many others, I do not believe that in so voting, the people, or indeed those people who voted, were voting in favour of the status quo. In fact, I believe strongly that the public was expressing a preference for political reform, and arguably radical political reform, in voting no. There are a number of legislative options for reform of the Seanad already on the table: the bill proposed by Senator John Crown and the bill jointly proposed by Senators Catherine Zappone and Fergal Quinn, as well as suggestions from government of extending the franchise for university seats on foot of a now quite dated amendment to the Constitution. Some take the view that these legislative proposals do not go far enough and are too limited by the kind of vocationalism that lies at the heart of the constitutional architecture for the upper house. I'm inclined to agree with this view without rejecting outright the well-intentioned incrementalism behind the various bills. If a more radical approach was taken to reform of the political apparatus of the state, one might well end up adopting a whole new constitution. This, I suspect, would be the unavoidable conclusion of any consideration by the Convention on the Constitution if it was required to consider the question of Seanad reform post-referendum, although I doubt that the Convention would arrive at one unified conclusion on this matter. And while this might be an interesting outcome, it would not add much to what we already know. There would also, I think, be an opportunity cost to the Convention on the Constitution in that it would be distracted from other issues of importance that would really benefit from its consideration. Therefore, in my view, the Convention should simply avoid the question of Seanad reform and focus on other issues. So what then are those other issues that the Convention should consider in the time that remains? I'm going to talk here about two issues that I believe are related: socio-economic rights and executive accountability. And I think it's critically important to recognise that these issues are in fact related. In recent years, there has been a somewhat fraught debate among legal commentators and activists about the issue of socio-economic rights in the Irish Constitution. The debate intensified after the now famous cases of Sinnott and TD, in which the Supreme Court, by a majority, set its face against justiciable socio-economic rights grounded on a particular view of the separation of powers. This is where the court essentially adopted the commutative versus distributive justice distinction, a quaint philosophical distinction that could be questioned by many and is questioned by many, but one that lies at the heart of a very important set of decisions by the Irish Supreme Court. At the risk of oversimplifying, the Supreme Court said that unless clearly specified by the Constitution, it was not for the courts to identify unspecified rights of a justiciable kind. This was particularly the case in relation to socio-economic rights, which were viewed as more political or policy-driven, and which in any event were deemed explicitly to be non-justiciable in Article 5 of the Constitution, containing the so-called directive principles of social policy. According to proponents of this view, this was a true reading of the text of the 1937 Constitution. Of course, not everyone, including some members of the Supreme Court at that time, agreed with this view. So it's important to make a few preliminary points. The debate about socio-economic rights should, I think, be about more than the narrow question of justiciability. In other words, can you sue to enforce a socio-economic right? The reason that this issue has been so dominant in any consideration of the question of socio-economic rights may be because of the nature of the reliefs that were in issue in the Sinnott and TD cases, i.e. mandatory reliefs of a detailed kind that did actually, to be fair, raise important and legitimate questions about the separation of powers. Of course, the argument can also be made that if the debate on socio-economic rights is not about justiciability, it is not about very much. In other words, if you cannot enforce your socio-economic rights ultimately by recourse to the courts, you are not really talking about rights at all. This is true, but it is also the argument that is used most forcefully by opponents of socio-economic rights to discredit the arguments in favour of socio-economic rights, and even sometimes the proponents of such arguments. According to this view, those who propose justiciable socio-economic rights simply want to avoid the messy business of democratic persuasion, with a preference for settling debates by unelected and unaccountable judges. In other words, if you are in favour of socio-economic rights in any specific way, you just want to put such essential matters, essentially political matters, beyond debate. You want, in the view of some, socialism by stealth. Nobody, of course, seems to notice the paradox at the heart of this paranoia. That is, that the guarantors of such socialism would be the judiciary. That is, of course, an unfair characterisation, but a nonetheless potent one, usually followed with a menacing prediction of rampant redistribution, for which read higher taxes to pay for these expensive socio-economic rights. I see the issue of socio-economic rights differently. Firstly, I do not see provision for socio-economic rights at the level of the Constitution as a panacea, no more than I would see provision for civil and political rights at the level of the Constitution as a panacea. I do, however, see making constitutional provision for such rights as an indication of seriousness on the part of the state about certain core minimum obligations. Far from seeing such rights as anti-democratic, I see them as profoundly democratic, and would confidently predict that constitutional rights of a socio-economic nature might enjoy widespread popular support if proposed by way of addition to the catalogue of rights already clearly protected by the Constitution. All of the arguments about politicising the judiciary and breaking down the separation of powers can, I think, be answered. The bigger challenge for proponents of socio-economic rights is to come up with a formulation for the constitutional protection of such rights that goes further than shibbolethtic symbolism while not entrenching one rigid ideology in the Constitution. And it is at this point, I think, that it's helpful to stand back somewhat and ask, what is the Constitution for? One author, Gregoire Weber, argues for what he calls the negotiable Constitution, in which what he calls underdeterminate rights are guaranteed, leaving the resolution of rights disputes to a later day. According to this view, the Constitution is a form of unfinished business, with the task of finishing or at least progressing that business falling to the legislature. And note he emphasises the role of the legislature, the democratic organ, not necessarily the judiciary. We must therefore, I think, be honest and realistic about what can be achieved by means of constitutional reform. We must admit that socio-economic inequalities cannot be obliterated by constitutional recognition of socio-economic rights. If you prohibit poverty in the Constitution, quite simply it will not disappear. It may be necessary, I think, to go even further in acknowledging the marginal importance of the Constitution itself to most people's lives. None of this is an argument against making provision in the Constitution for socio-economic rights, but rather an argument for moderation about what will be achieved by making such provision. Those who are sceptical generally about human rights, but not necessarily opposed to the idea of the state having certain core minimum obligations to provide for the socio-economic well-being of people, might argue for legislative provision for socio-economic rights, or programmatic realisation of such rights without a legal framework as an alternative to constitutional provision or constitutional protection. It is an open question, I believe, whether this can be done in a meaningful way absent some constitutional framework. There are, I think, a variety of options open to the Convention on the Constitution if it wishes to consider the question of socio-economic rights. It could recommend provision in the Constitution for a set of specified socio-economic rights such as education, housing and health, subject to available resources and other caveats. Alternatively, it could incorporate by reference in the Constitution the various socio-economic rights enshrined in international human rights instruments ratified by the state. This would, of course, run the risk of perpetuating in the domestic sphere the flaws of the international system for progressively realising socio-economic rights, to say nothing of the collateral controversies that would inevitably ensue from any proposal to incorporate any provision of international human rights law in the Constitution. It seems to me that the most effective and practical option would be to codify core minimum obligations in specified areas of socio-economic rights, using the relevant international standards by which the state is bound anyway as a matter of international law as benchmarks. This would achieve little, of course, unless accompanied by political reform. And this is where I think it's really important to establish the connection between political reform and advancing socio-economic rights. Political reform providing for greater executive accountability. And what I propose here might seem somewhat unexciting, but I believe it could have a very real impact. I propose that the Office of Ombudsman be reconfigured as a constitutional office akin to the Controller and Auditor General, with a clearly defined mandate to protect human rights. In effect, such a reconfigured constitutional office would take over the demonstrably conflicted role of guardian of the public interest assigned under the Constitution currently to the Office of Attorney General. A constitutionalised Office of Ombudsman could provide a framework for other agencies such as the Human Rights and Equality Commission and be explicitly designated as an emanation of the Oireachtas, thus emphasising its independence and that indeed of other statutory bodies within its framework from the executive. And that would be a key change in the way in which such offices were viewed. This would provide, I think, in a very tangible way, a mechanism to bring the executive to account politically for such things as its compliance with core minimum obligations in relation to specified socio-economic rights. It would, I think, be a subtle re-engineering of the political architecture of the state that could generate an awful lot less disruption than something like abolishing the upper house. It would alter the political culture by rebalancing things as between Parliament and Executive and allow for the possibility of amplifying systemic injustices as opposed to individual grievances. If effective, it could even lessen the kind of litigation that is so feared by opponents of justiciable socio-economic rights, because you wouldn't be looking to the individual grievance, you would be looking to the systemic injustice and seeking to correct that in the appropriate forum, which would be a political forum, the Dáil and the Seanad, through which the constitutionalised Office of Ombudsman would be clearly connected. There are many other issues of constitutional reform that I have not mentioned, and I have approached the task given to me tonight, and it is a limited task, to, in a sense, provoke you into a debate and not into necessarily a discussion of the issues that I've raised. I've approached this task without reference to transcendent constitutional developments at EU level, some of which, quite frankly, will make subjects like Irish constitutional law seem somewhat arcane in the future. In proposing that consideration be given to socio-economic rights, I realise that I am suggesting a theme rather than an issue to the Convention on the Constitution, but I think the members of the Convention have demonstrated plenty of ability to deal with themes. The value of the Convention as a deliberative process is that it both elevates and popularises discourse. It has managed to do this at a time of palpable public cynicism about politics and affairs of state, and I think the members of the Convention deserve to have their considered views taken very seriously indeed by government. Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you very much. There's a lot of substance in that paper. Towards the end, though, it's coming to the point of connecting with the public and getting the views from the public about what you feel are the priorities. So, actually, now we're going to that. It's going to be over to you. We're going to hear a bit later on from some of our three of our citizen members, but we want to give as much time and space as possible to listening to your views. I think we wrote in microphones, or what are we doing? Yeah, we have microphones. So I'll take a few comments. I mean, we're not necessarily going to respond to these comments. I mean, we're here to listen rather than to debate. So who would like to make the first comment? This gentleman here. And if I could ask as a general practice, as we go through the evening,
somebody is beginning to speak, could you identify yourself, and if you're beyond, if you like, if you're representing an organisation, could you equally identify that?
Good evening, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I am not with any organisation yet. My name is Fergus Quinlan. I live in the Burren, which is the opposite side of Galway, over there somewhere. And obviously I've been, my age, been following constitutions and all sorts of amendments and things for a long time. My point is, if it's only 2 minutes 30 seconds, the preamble and Article 44, referring to religious structures and prophets, are divisive and encourage supplication. Such worship of monarchs undermines our human confidence and endorses hierarchy and class. All such references in the preamble could be replaced by a lyrical evocation of the human spirit, a proclamation of the individual and collective human empathy based on the copious prose and poetry of this wonderful country. You spoke at length about socio-economic rights, mentioned them. The function of our society, this is a separate point, is not the production of polite, compliant operatives and consumers to serve an economy. This is what we presently do. In a new constitution, I would see that we could evoke somewhere a sustainable economy serving an egalitarian society. It could be construed within it as a mission statement, one that all our citizens could strive towards, seeking unity across class, gender, race, religion, and mainly education. We have presently many forms of poverty, but perhaps the most prevailing poverty is a poverty of philosophy. We are de facto a science-based society with ethical thinking dating from the fall of the Roman Empire. I draw your attention to the clock on the wall here, which is running an hour late, early I think. It takes a while for us to adjust things. It's taking a long time to adjust our philosophy to suit. As I say, these belief systems are embarrassing, irrelevant, and are never actually discussed within our civil society. If we could only, and I'm talking about the Constitution, find and include a moral ethos that is relevant, that does not tolerate poverty or divisions. Can we find a way out at all of the concept of Catholic, Protestant, Jewish and Muslim children? How wonderful it would be to have roundly educated children of the Republic who could make their own choices. I am an architect, and one learns that regardless of how elegant our visions might be, you have to get your foundations right. Likewise, you and all the members of the Constitutional Convention have to get the foundations and fundamentals of the new Constitution right. The cracking of the previous flimsy foundations resulted in a catastrophic moral collapse. All references to the fragile and failed ethos of religion should be removed from the Constitution. It is, after all, a republic. I accept that religion can and does provide comfort and meaning on a private level to many within the state. It only engenders hostility and divisions when it imposes a divisive ethos publicly, such as in the Constitution. Do I have an agenda? Yes, I have an agenda. I passionately wish for a better society for my children and grandchildren. I wish to live inclusively within this country, which I dearly love. We must look at what unites the people of the Republic and what will provide a better platform for morality. And that is the strong, stable foundations of human empathy. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Gentleman here, please. First row. Could we get the mic, please?
Will you all right looting Wilge? Just vi man tokilish med vi laraig egen kaintor I kaintor don channel motherlish socio-economic rights. Stochen courses more honeyman shaw, mar vraham shigul rodechent harabe mi carts tier shaw. Nur ta access to health eg bra and made arigit that. Agus higem ken fa gevetach. She shall lanachtarai ko fada shaw. She shin mata arigidat. No mata de rohan arigidat le arches private gewehet. Go federlet een chorus line to pibli I'm sure wadni stuppi na dina atai bra gehilus go homlan on public health service. Boalum se ganyenchen an convention shaw. Brannower shaw, maar feit de gomse go show rod aan wonutsig o heeft kaarte dena Gomeach an access céine ag chulaghune sa tír, maidir le chorus láinse, cuma cén airgid atá chop, cén datha tárab, dá mar rud go rá muid sa tír seo ará go gatha fannacht ciú 3 bliana le haid hip replacement maiálar go bhfuil dadú ar de éidean, nó go maiálar gur nach bhfuil tú de chatilchoch, nó maiálar rud a behéile mar sin. Fech ar nói, fech mi de goil in éirfaoi. Ach tá mi de rá sin le dína, maiálar nach bhfuil airgid chop le íchas. Agus fechta gomsa go rud har a bheith pránach agus antáhairt a sin. Curamagi.
Would you like to speak?
Yes.
And again, could you say who you are?
I'm Annie Wise.
Speak into the microphone, please.
Okay, Annie Wise from the environmental arm. I would like to have the environment protected underneath the Constitution. Ireland is only one of 6 countries within Europe that doesn't protect the environment. Now, Ireland is known as a green country. Our economics, our tourism, everything that is Irish has this green image. And my suggestion is that the right of a healthy environment should be recognised within the Constitution and is the duty of all persons to protect, safeguard and enhance the environment.
Okay, we're over here. So this gentleman I saw first, and after that we go across to the side of the room. This gentleman here first.
The name is John Hughes. I'm a member of the Second Republic group, which is a non-political citizens' initiative for political reform. But at my first point, I'm just speaking in a personal capacity. I'm a graduate of the National College of Art and Design, and from 1979, I should have been entitled to vote in the university panel for the Senate elections. So, like USI have been trying to get that carried. Now, what amazes me is that there was no obligation within the Constitution to enforce the Cabinet. I use the word Cabinet, and I put an underline on the word Cabinet, to enforce the Cabinet to legislate for the will of the people. Now that is something that has evaded most people. In 1979, the people made a solemn decision to change the Constitution. That decision was ignored and has been ignored since 1979. So I have been disenfranchised since 1979, as have probably more than the sum total of NUIG, NUI Cork, and NUI Maynooth, and UCD, and TCD, disenfranchised by politicians. Not by civil servants, but by politicians. Now that is a disgrace, and that is one of the scandals, because what it does is it shows an absolute disdain and disrespect for the process of constitutional and political reform. Now, we in the Second Republic, in which capacity I'm speaking now, we drew up a proposal for a citizens' assembly for political reform, and we came across a stumbling block in the Constitution, which is Article 46.2. Article 46.2 says, every proposal for an amendment of this Constitution shall be initiated in Dáil Éireann as a bill, and shall, upon having been passed or deemed to have been passed by both houses of the Oireachtas, be submitted by referendum to the decision of the people. Now, that sounds all very well, but who actually initiates bills in Dáil Éireann? People would say political parties. Not political parties that initiate bills, it's the Cabinet. The Cabinet initiate bills on a deputation into Dáil Éireann to put this proposal to politicians. We were told informally by several politicians the Cabinet means 3 people, because the rest of the Cabinet basically go along with what the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, and I forget the third person, but basically it's tyranny of the cabinet. That's what we have in this country, and we have no accountability which would allow ordinary citizens to demand open, transparent government from the cabinet. The cabinet makes these decisions. So when you want to reform the constitution, everything falls down to what did the cabinet want. British Columbia, the Citizens' Assembly for the Constitution put a recommendation to the people. The people voted based on what that assembly communicated to the general population. So the point I'm trying to make is, if we're talking about using groups like the Constitutional Convention or the Convention of the Constitution to reform the political process in this country, we have to look at the source of the power. The source of the power is the cabinet. Article 46.2 is crucial to reform the Constitution. It's so fundamental because it gives full power to the cabinet. So I would, if we are to proceed with organisations like this, if they are to have any effect, they must themselves put on their own agenda the structure, the remit, the power of the actual convention, vis-a-vis Article 46.2. Because otherwise, if this issue is not addressed, we have a list of constitutional reports going back 40 years, and practically none of the recommendations have been implemented. This convention must address the issue that it will be nothing but a talking shop unless the Article 46.2 is addressed. That's it.
Thank you very much. To take two more comments, and then I want to go to the citizen members for their input.
Thank you. My name is Martin Gilligan. I'm from the Earth and Ocean Sciences in UI Galway. I'm just speaking in a personal capacity, and I'm arguing for retention of the measure in the Constitution which relates to blasphemy, as I see it as ensuring religious tolerance, not curbing freedom of speech. I think we would not argue or defend the freedom of speech of the Ku Klux Klan or neo-Nazi groups to issue their racial hatred. Yet religion and religious beliefs for those people who hold it run deeper than the colour of their skin or their national identity. And I think it's important, if we want to ensure a stable society, that we ensure religious tolerance. Religious intolerance is fueling the wars right across the Middle East between Sunni and Shia Islam. We saw a cartoon in Denmark in 2006 which offended Islam and actually created riots right across North Africa. I think we may not share or understand indeed the beliefs of other people in our multiracial global society, but we should at least respect them, and the Constitution is a place where we can ensure respect for all religions and for those with none. But it must be there. Thank you.
On Saturday to the live stream, we have some very fine experts who will make a presentation, and then we have, if you like, a number of perspectives on this issue. So thank you for that. This gentleman.
Thank you. I'm John James Malone. I'm LLB, and I'm also the Vice Auditor of the new Legion of Mary Society here at NUIG. On the issue of socio-economic rights, it's time. We should have universal health care in Ireland. We're talking about a lot of things, but I want to get down to something really practical and something that's affecting most people in this country today. You know, if we really are part of Europe, we should have something as basic as universal health care. My local senator, Pascal Mooney, is inundated with people, very sick people, who have lost their medical cards. The other day I had oral surgery. As a poor law student, I can only pay for part of it. The dental hospital wants €3,000 if they want to do any further treatment. I don't have €3,000. I'm a poor law student. So I have to rely on the St. Vincent de Paul just for my health care. I mean, this is absolutely disgraceful in the 21st century in Ireland. So, you know, this is something that's affecting a lot of people, including myself. And, you know, it's a joke, really, compared to other countries in Europe. Very, very sick people cannot pay for their medication, cannot pay for surgery. I mean, it's just absolutely disgraceful in 21st century Ireland. And, you know, the Lisbon Treaty was founded so that countries could opt out of Europe. And I mean, if this is the healthcare system, we may as well opt out. Because it's interesting, in some ways we're part of Europe, and in other ways we're not. If I want to train to be a barrister, I have to pay €1,000 for an entrance exam, which I've already passed here at NUIG, including constitutional law and tort law, etc., etc. So, you know, there's a question, are we part of Europe or are we not? And we really need universal health care in this country. If I was living in London, I wouldn't be asking the St. Vincent de Paul to give me €3,000 because I have a health care bill. Thank you for listening.
I actually do want to take as many voices as possible, but we do also aim to end about 9:30. So I would ask that people keep their contributions pithy and clear and to the point. But could I ask, I want to come back to our citizen members, because I said earlier on, and it's been universally recognised, that the contribution of citizen members has been really very important and very good. And we have 3 of them with us here this evening. Mike Lane, Terry Cormagan and John Lardner. And I'd like them just to, from their own perspective, talk about what has been part of this convention, what has it meant to them, how have they found it, what's your experience? Mike, would you like to start? Maybe go to the microphone. And after that, John and then Terry. Yeah.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Lane. I'm from Galway. I'm 56. I have 4 children. And I'm an ordinary Joe Soap. In a word, my experience with the Constitutional Convention is it has been very positive. It started back in, it was July of last year, when I was out in the garden and I saw a lady coming with a clipboard, and I said, oh, somebody's looking for money here, you know. And it turned out that she was looking for people that might be interested in the Constitutional Convention, and she asked me if I'd heard about it, and I had, and I was interested in it. And I was surprised because, you know, we all hear about Red C polls and MRBI polls and Irish Time polls, and I always say to myself, gosh, you know, I was never asked. I was never asked to have a voice in that. So when I got this opportunity, I was positive about it immediately, but I also had to check with my wife here to make sure that I could go along with it, because it's a commitment. It's 8 weekends over a 12-month period, and you know, you're going away from home, and I have a family and 4 children, and you know, when you're at home and you're living out in the country, you know, you're a taxi service, you're going here and going everywhere. So my wife had to take on that responsibility while I would be away. So I wasn't exactly sure what to expect, but when I did go to the very first meeting, well, we had a launch in Dublin, and then in January or February, we met up, and I met ordinary people, just postmen, workers, politicians, people just ordinary people like myself. You know, and I've heard some blogs saying, "Oh, these are not just ordinary people." You know, I think they're people who have been looking for links between us and political parties and links between us with some sort of an agenda. But there are a lot of genuine, ordinary people there who've given up the time, but they also have an interest in current affairs. And, you know, I was thinking about it that it's a rare opportunity for a citizen to get involved, to be able to shape, or possibly shape, the Constitution for the future. And it's historic, and it's only been done in a very few small, I think a few small examples in a few countries. So this is like an experiment. So I think, you know, people are probably looking at us and we're kind of like guinea pigs. How is it going to work out? But it has been very positive. Just to give you an idea of, you have behind us, we have all this expert information comes in. They come in with the best, from what I can see, you know, the best minds, the academics. They come in with the reports that have been done locally, nationally, internationally. And then you sit around the table, and the tables are broken out with some citizens, some politicians. You also have a facilitator on each table and a note taker. So it's really fairly done. You know, the facilitator is there to make sure that nobody dominates, nobody's dictating, nobody's getting too much time. And you're also asked on a regular basis, you know, have you been allowed enough time to speak? Have you been allowed to get your case across? And also, have people been trying to dominate you? So it's very fair like that. You know, you're also meeting and listening to things that do affect your life and will affect you in the future. So for me, it has been very positive. I have met people there, I've made friends there, and I look forward to going. And I will be sad when it is over. So, you know, what I'm trying to do is trying to convince people to get involved, and hopefully in the future there will be further conventions. And you know, sometimes when you hear people making some speeches this evening, you know, there's a lot of big words and things like that, but everything is explained clearly. So, you know, there are ordinary people there, and you know, you're allowed to ask questions, and if you're not sure, the people will explain it to you. And that's really it. I mean, if anybody has any question to ask me, I'd be glad to answer it.
Okay, Mike, we go on to the other citizen members. Thanks very much indeed. I think Jonathan said at the beginning, you know, that part of the skepticism at the beginning is a wider cynicism about politics. And this is actually very corrosive to our democracy. And really what, in reaching out and having these meetings right around the country, we are trying to connect with people and their deeply held opinions and to listen. So this is part of it. John.
Good evening. My name is John Lardner. I hail from the Tuam area of County Galway. Like Mike, I think I was in the garden too when someone approached with a clipboard. I was very willing to become involved, and I was very surprised, like Mike, to be selected. It's not often these things happen. And I'm very proud to be part of what I would see as a historic event where I, as an ordinary citizen member, can hear the differing opinions, both for and against motions, where I, as a citizen member, can interpret excellent advice given by academics and opinion groups, and where I can, in an open and fair manner, it has to be said, give my opinion. It is listened to, and if it is overbearing, I can be told that I need to think about it as well. I've attended all of the convention meetings to date. I found it very rewarding. For me, as a person to become more involved in the Constitution and what it means for me and my family. As I said, we're provided with opinion papers, which allows me to read about the matter open for discussion, and then discuss it with my family, my friends, and my work colleagues. And then it allows for greater debate. I find, again, as such matters as recently as the Shannon debate, where I can point to the Constitution and explain to my colleagues where it is, where it sits within the Constitution, and allow them to have a fair opinion and justification when they go to make their decisions. The members that I have met over the last year, indeed a lot of them are friends at this stage now, all of us would agree that conventions or meetings such as have happened over the last year, where we're allowed to hear debates, read opinion papers, excellent as they are, should continue into the future and should form part of every referendum, every decision that this state makes, and every citizen member should become greater involved. I would have read a bit in becoming involved in every election or every referendum. I do an awful lot more reading now and a lot more listening to opinions. Again, like Mike, just an ordinary Joe Soap. I have a 9-to-5 job, but I have been delighted to be part of the convention and hope that the idea of convention, the idea of open discussion continues into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but by no means least, Terry Cormack. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Terry Cormack. My background has been engineering all my life, where I've been designing equipment and machines and buildings. And the end product is always out there. You are looking to design or to come up with some end product. I'm new to the convention. I was only drafted in for the last event, for the last conventional meeting. That on the citizenship. I found it fascinating and interesting, but I just wanted to reassure this group because, you know, it has been stated that something like this should perhaps continue into the state for a more permanent basis. And if so, I just want to assure you that the design of the way of implementing the report I found astonishing. Thanks to Art and Tom and whoever else is in the background. It's a perfect design situation where the 100 people consisting of 33 politicians and 66 ordinary people, ordinary citizens, come together, where, as Michael and Martin have said, there is a facilitator at each table. So we're broken down into tables of about 8-10 people. And the opinions of no one person dominate the table. The facilitator at the table sees this, which is the exact akin way to a design procedure. If you want to implement anything, then you need a design procedure. And this is the exact way of doing it, where you get everybody that's involved, you get their opinion, you get it factually, and you discuss it. And after hearing detailed papers from experts who are excellently selected. They amaze me with the way they brought over the information in a non-technical manner, because, as my predecessors have said, you know, many of us aren't technical. You folks many of you are into law and you really know far more about it than we do. But after hearing these speakers, we can make a decision about what to do, and at our individual tables, we discuss them. No politicians get precedence or preference. So it's a balanced thing, and speakers that are out of line are quickly brought back into line. So there is no way of anybody dominating anything. So the design experience starts, and the whole thing starts to gel together per table. At the end of the day, Each table brings its opinion through the chair to an end result or a ballot, which is exactly how you would design or generate any piece of structure or machinery or anything. So it's a perfect way of designing. So at the end of the day, you've got the basis for a good design. So you've got this ballot at the end of the day. The following day, that ballot of perhaps 5 or 6 items is then discussed finally. So you've got 5 or 4 or however many proposals to select from before you make a final decision on what design to run with, whether to accept a proposal, not accept a proposal, and it's come from a vast array of people from varying backgrounds, varying levels of education, varying socioeconomic backgrounds. So you've got a very good opinion, a very good design for a piece of constitution. So that's how I found it. As I say, I have done one weekend. I found it an excellent way of designing legislation. And I'd just like to reassure you that it's a worthwhile event, and long may it continue.
Okay.
That's all I have to say about it.
We've about 45 minutes left, and I really do want to get as many voices as possible. I'm going to go to this side of the room first, but I come back to your side first. Could we go from the very top, please? The lady at the back. And then we work our way down. And again, could I encourage you to be brief and to the point?
Thank you very much. I'd just like to make one comment. Very interesting what Terry was saying about balance. I'm delighted I was chosen now. I think looking around here, there must be at least a third of the people female, but so far, before myself, just one woman has spoken. I would encourage you to keep balance very, very much in mind. But what I wanted to actually talk about was primary schools, and the fact that so many primary schools in this country are run by the Catholic Church, and that there is really no true religious education in those churches. What we have is religious indoctrination, quite often poisonous religious indoctrination. I think that this country really needs to look at religious education, where you start off looking at the creation myths, when you then work through the universal religions, the big ones, the small ones, from antiquity to the present moment, and that you most certainly take into account those people who have no religion, and that the rationality of their viewpoint is put forward, and that children are encouraged to think philosophically, not to accept and regurgitate information, but to question, because I think it is far more important that any child asks the question, but, or what if, or maybe it was, and that those are encouraged, and that is not what I see in our primary education today. I hear children being told to be quiet and shut up. I hear children being told that this is a Catholic school, therefore what we say is right. I foster a 10-year-old child who came home from school recently being instructed to write, "God made the world." If they want to say some Catholics believe God made the world, that is a true statement. The statement this child was being obliged to write down and to accept has absolutely no evidence base for it at all. So it is in effect lying to children, which I find abhorrent. I think this is something that is at the crux of the antipathy of most adults today. The child I foster is in the confirmation class this year. I said to him, "What are you confirming?" "I'm doing my confirmation." "What's that?" "Well, You go to church and then you get a pile of money. I've asked a number of 10-year-olds recently that question. It's always the same. They all know they're getting the money. That's what it's about. They haven't a notion, but they are being indoctrinated, and it is not good for them, and it is not good for society, and it's not good for the world, and we really, really need to challenge it. Oh, Bridget Carlin, I come from the southeast corner of Galway, a very rural area where there is no choice. You do not have the Educate Together schools. There's no choice for so many people in the rural areas.
Hi, Gerard Barry, private citizen. Coming back actually to the Constitution and rather to kind of other extraneous matters. The matter of property rights, Fergal Quinn's upward-only rent review bill, we're told that these things are impossible to do because of the Constitution. I wonder, would Professor O'Connell be able to comment on that? And also just at the meetings in terms of the presentation of different views, if you're depending on interest groups to provide the different views on controversial issues at the Constitutional Convention, isn't there a danger that you end up having the meetings, I suppose, led by the interest group that shouts loudest and that bangs most at the door? Okay.
We tried, and at the very first meeting I spelled out a number of operational principles that we were going to work to. One of them was fairness. And we try very, very hard to make sure there is a range of perspectives presented to the group. We absolutely try to avoid the situation that you described. I'll ask Donncha later on to address your question. This gentleman at the very back, yeah.
Cormac O'Corcoran is Anam Domas and Cashla Noah and Shohakan and Galiva. I'd just like to compliment the tone generally that I've observed here, very respectful tone of all the speakers towards everyone else. I'm here as a private citizen, but I've taken part in various referendum campaigns over the last 10 years or so. And I'd just like to, I'll try and be brief, but I'd just like to comment on the second last speakers. There was one point that was made that children should be taught not to regurgitate but to question, and in the spirit of that idea, I would like to question a few things myself, if you'll allow me.
Not too long.
No, I'll try to be brief. No, it's just I'd say in Ireland at the moment, I would say we are living in an era of linguistic terrorism. There is a certain set of beliefs we are all supposed to hold as good secularists. These are the beliefs of a liberal agenda that has been making great gains over the last 20 years in Irish public policy. Belief in the existence of a liberal agenda was much ridiculed in the 90s. However, time has shown that belief in the existence of such an agenda was indeed vindicated. There is a liberal agenda, and I say liberal with small l. True liberalism, I would have thought, implies toleration of the points of view of others. Such toleration is something we have not seen in recent Irish political history. Linguistic terrorism is the phrase I use to describe the lazy and anti-intellectual alternative to real debate in a whole range of political and social issues. Phrases like homophobia, fundamentalism, right-wing, anti-woman, anti-choice are thrown at anyone who dares to offer a view which deviates in any respect from the received wisdom of the current age. The fact that Minister Pat Rabbitte recently indicated that we will have to pay, even if we choose not to pay a television licence, we will still have to pay even to have access to computers. The point I'm making is that the referendum campaigns we have seen, there's an anti-democratic wind that is blowing in this country at the moment. For example, Enda Kenny will be remembered as the Taoiseach who set as his goal the legalisation of abortion in this country. This was despite the fact that he himself, along with his party colleagues, had actually courted the pro-life vote prior to their election by making a pledge not to legalise abortion. The children's referendum, if you go back to the 1995 divorce referendum, half the population voted no. Government money, sorry.
Look, I think we have your point.
Yeah.
You're
Thank
concerned
you.
about the encroachment of, as you see it, the Liberal agenda.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take the comment earlier on. I do want to have an adequate representation of female voices here this evening as well. So could you...
This lady go first.
No, you're first. Oh, you're first. Here. No, I know. We're coming to you in a minute. We're dealing with this side first. This lady here. No, you.
Yeah, over here. I would say probably the exact. My name is Rachel Donnelly. I'm here to represent Galway Pro-Choice, so the exact opposite agenda to the last speaker. So we're here to ask the Convention to consider the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, which is Article 40.3.3. This represents the constitutional ban on abortion. The wording reads, "The state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn and with due regard to the equal right to life of the mother, guarantees in its laws to respect and as far as practicable by its laws to defend and vindicate that right."
Okay, so that's your basic point.
Yeah, so we'd ask that...
Okay, could we move on then? This lady over there.
My name is Aisling Heffernan. I'm an undergraduate student here in NUIG, and I was diagnosed with a particular condition 2 years ago. So I was 16, 17, and I was in the public health system. And I've never been more scared, to be perfectly honest. I was put under an OT who basically turned around and said that I was lying about my condition, and she didn't even have the basic information on it. So what I would like is greater protection for people under the health system. I also come from a family in which autoimmune is quite prevalent. So it's not only me, it's not only my age, it is a lot of people. I mean, I've had family who have high blood pressure and were put on low blood pressure tablets. My grandmother's bone snapped in her sleep because of the medication she was put on. And that's not a fabrication, and also what I experienced. So I would like greater protection for people under the health system.
With health issues. Okay,
Yeah.
this lady here.
Liz Connolly, I'm a volunteer with Amnesty International. My comment is actually drawn from my day job in Citizens Information Centre, where I'm dealing every day with members of the public trying to avail of their rights and entitlements. Given that Ireland has an obligation for socio-economic rights, and given that there's a subsistence level, supplementary welfare level in this country that is set at €186 for a personal rate, my question is Ireland reneging on its obligations in January 2014 when job seekers allowance for people up to the age of 25 will drop to €100, and after that it'll be 144 up to the age of 26. That's it.
You might ask Donica to comment on that. I'm going to take 3 more comments on this side. And then we're going to this side. Okay, this gentleman here, please.
My name's Jack Little. As you can hear, I'm from England, and I grew up as a subject, and the law was derived... Oh, sorry. I grew up, did you hear what I said so far? I grew up as a subject in England. I've been here for 20 years, by the way. And the law was derived from God through a particular church. It was an established church. So I was really pleased to come to Ireland, where I was a citizen of a republic, where the law is derived from the people. And you have a written constitution. The large part of the purpose of that, as I understand, is to protect minority groups from sectional interest taking over in the Oireachtas. And so it was a bit of a shock when I read...
What's your basic point?
It was a bit of a shock when I read the preamble to the Constitution, and I found that not only was anybody who didn't believe in God, but people who believed in other gods other than Christians, and even some Christians who don't believe in the Trinity were excluded from it. So this is the beginning, setting out the stall for the whole of the Constitution, which is supposed to be inclusive. There was mention earlier of the Good Friday Agreement. There's a lot of talk then about parity of esteem. If you don't have the parity of esteem in the beginning of the Constitution, it doesn't respect the views of all the citizens, and that is what being a citizen of a republic is. Right. The law derives from you.
Your basic point. Then we're going to go over to this side after this.
Thank you. My name is Amy Burke, and I'm an LLB student here in the university. And my point is just in regard to the references to God in the Constitution. We've heard a lot about the removal of God from the Constitution. And I'd just like to say that the references are actually a testament to the convictions of the men who both penned this Constitution and they built our republic. They were convicted that their belief in the Christian God was at the core of their convictions about liberal democracy, religious freedom and individual rights. And my basic point is that if we remove the reference to God from our Constitution, we are essentially rejecting all sense of absolute right and wrong. And if we get rid of God's standard, then man is free to put in his standard of what's right and wrong, which is fatal for society, as we see with abortion, homosexuality, relative, what every man believes for himself. So I would like to just maintain that we should retain the references to God in our Constitution.
Thank you. So, as we work our way down the room here, you see fundamentally different opinions on what the Constitution should be doing, what it should be expressing, what values it should be articulating. So I think hopefully you begin to understand the challenge facing our lawmakers when it comes to framing a constitution that's relevant for the 21st century. Okay, this gentleman was most insistent in having his hand up, so we'll go to you first.
Hi, Mike Flynn is my name. Just Irish citizen, whatever, observer and believer in my own constitutional rights. Basically, the Constitution has failed the greater public interest as regards the current retirement apartheid that we're watching in progress at the moment, whereby more than 1 million workers are being levied to pay pensions for select citizens, and how, identifying that failure of the Constitution, do we put in mechanisms to get the establishment, and as the gentleman earlier said, the Cabinet, to abide by the Constitution and rule for the greater public interest and not themselves. Okay. That's it.
Thanks, Mike. You first and then you, okay? And then you, okay.
Thanks very much. My name is Mary Mahoney. I'm a PhD student here at NYG. I'm just a very brief submission, basically following on from a few previous comments. In view of the undemocratic manner the recent abortion bill was rammed through the Dáil against the advice of the psychiatrists, the vote of the Irish Medical Organisation, and the wishes of the voters, I propose to the Convention an amendment to the Constitution explicitly banning the barbaric procedure of abortion. The Irish people believed in 1983 that enshrining the right to life of the unborn child in the Constitution would prevent the deliberate and intentional destruction of unborn babies. This has proved not to be the case. Apparently, certain party leaders do not understand the right to life includes the right not to be killed.
Okay.
Therefore, more explicit wording is now necessary to provide protection to human life at its very beginning.
I think we have your basic point. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, this is to follow you and the statement from Galway Pro-Choice. I am Sophie Farity, I'm a doctor, I'm a GP. I represent Doctors for Choice. I'm talking for the 4,000 women who go abroad to have an abortion every year, 4,000 patients who are forgotten by the Constitution. So I'm asking for the Convention to accept our submission on repealing the 8th Amendment and looking into this.
Okay.
For 4,000
Thank you.
women.
So, thank you. So there we have essentially two opposite, Mary and yourself, asking for actually completely opposite things. So, yeah, and that's fair enough, and that's why we're here. Could we ask you then to comment, please?
Hello.
Name, please.
I'm City Joshi. I'm a volunteer for Amnesty International, and I was just like to the Constitution represents an opportunity for the inclusion of economic, social and cultural rights, will we be taking that opportunity?
Thank you. That's your basic point. In fact, Donica, agreeing somewhat with what Donica said earlier, this gentleman here, I feel a certain affinity towards you with the beard.
Peter O'Hara. I go to the Midwest Humanists, which meet in Limerick for people with no religion, no God, from Limerick, Clare and Tipperary. And I am also in Atheist Ireland and the Humanist Association of Ireland. I'm for changing the Constitution to separate church and state, to make the Constitution secular. And I'm going to speak about one particular aspect, the declarations of office for when you become a judge, when you become president, and when you go to your first meeting of the Council of State. And there are 3 separate articles on this, and each of them, the declaration that the Constitution says you have to make says, I, in the presence of Almighty God, give your name and then make your declaration. And the one for judge and president have a further statement at the end, may God direct me and sustain me. Now, this is a problem because I concentrate mostly on the judges. There's about 150 judges, and they administer justice, and we depend on justice. Now, at 150, there's surely 10 or more of them who actually don't believe in God, but I've never seen in public that any of them did anything other than say the constitutional oath. Now, that means, I'm only making the guess about 10, but I think it's a fair guess out of 150. That means that such a person, the Constitution forces them to lie in public. In other words, to say, in the presence of Almighty God, when this particular person does not believe in a God. Now, a judge is a very important job where they may make decisions about any of us to send us to prison or to cause us to lose loads of money. And so the prime requirement is honesty as well as fairness between the two parties. But the present Constitution, having this religious declaration, is bad for the administration of justice. So although I originally thought of this because it's very unfair on me if I wanted to become a judge, because I don't believe in a God, and so it's discrimination against people who have no religion, it's also particularly important because it actually harms the administration of justice, and so it is an issue to all people, including the people who believe in God. And if it's to be replaced, it should be replaced entirely by one declaration with no God. If there was a choice between the religious and the non-religious, then judges would be marked out as either this fellow believes in God or this woman here who's a judge doesn't believe in God, and it would be an extra source of bias by either of the parties to a legal case who thought the judge's religiosity was relevant. So for that reason, it should be changed to a single non-religious declaration, and this is part of my view for making the constitutional secular and separating church and state.
Thank you very much. We received a submission on that recently from you, but also from 7 members of the Council of State along those lines. This lady here with her hand up, yeah, and then we go back to you at the back.
I'm Madeleine McAleer, and I'm also a member of the Midwest Humanists Association, and I'm going to speak also about the need for separation of church and state in a secular society. Everyone should have their right to their religious beliefs or their non-religious philosophy. However, the state should remain neutral on these matters. It's the only way to protect equally the rights of the religious and the non-religious in society and in a republic. Including the preamble and the epilogue, there are approximately 10 references to religion, God, in the presence of Almighty God, blasphemy, and also saying that the powers of the government are deriving under God and glory to God in the epilogue. I'd like to highlight in particular Article 44, giving special protection to religious organisations, that this should be removed from the Constitution to give equality to religious and non-religious people. So I'm calling on the Constitutional Development or Constitutional Convention to discuss the separation of church and state and removing all the references from the 1937 Constitution, so that we can have a secular society, a functioning democracy for everybody living in a republic.
Thank you very much. Good luck. I'm conscious that we're at this stage we're getting repetition of certain themes. I'd be keen that people who haven't already discussed or who want to say things that we haven't already heard would have their voices now. This gentleman at the back first.
Hello, and thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to me. My name is Patrick Mannion, and I'm currently a student here in NUI Galway studying the LLM in public law. My problem is with Article 17.2 of the Constitution, and more importantly how it deals with standing orders in the Dáil and the accountability of the executive. At the present moment, no Dáil business may be set or amended except on proposal of the Taoiseach or Minister. And the problem is government amendments take precedence in all business. As a citizen and a law student watching leaders' questions, it's evident that the executive has supreme power. It's a bit farcical to watch how unaccountable the executive is when serious questions are asked by the opposition. Another problem is the government is using the whip system and how parliamentary business is managed directly by government chief whips, their own office, and also how easy it is for government to...
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. The executive accountability is your issue. This lady in the green. Yourself, your lady in the green jacket, please. Thank you.
My name is Nancy Smith, personal, just here on my own initiative. And what I would like to draw attention to is fairness for those with a reading problem, literacy problem, voting. This has been sorted out in the elections by having photographs of the particular TDs who are standing. But when it comes to a referendum, we have nothing to aid those with a literacy problem, which has happened, and we've had a number of them. So we say, take for instance, I'm just taking for an example, the last referendum on the Senate. If we had for those people who had a problem, you know, a house and a cross, an X over it for the abolition, and a house maybe with a table and all the people around it for those who wanted to remain. That would have made it more clear for those who had problems with the literacy. And this should be taken on board for referendums in the future, because sometimes it can be a problem.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. We've heard an awful lot of things that people would like to see changed in Irish life and so on. I mean, some of them don't need constitutional change. A lot of them don't need constitutional change. Donna, could you just, because that basic distinction between, you know, you asked the question, what's a constitution for? And the balance that we need to strike between having a set of words in a constitution which reflect the overall values of the society, and then the, if you like, the devolved function of the legislature to actually make the laws.
Yeah, but I think that was exactly the point I'm making when I quoted Weber on the question of the negotiable constitution, that it really ought to be unfinished business rather than finished business. And one of the things I'm listening very carefully to what's being said here, and I'm interpreting the emphasis on religion and not on the question of socioeconomic rights to be a resounding consensus that people are in favour of socioeconomic rights in the Constitution, that this is not a problematic question at all. And I'm going to be glued to my computer next Saturday watching the debate on blasphemy, because I suspect it will be a fairly lively one. So, you know, this is one of the things is if you see the Constitution as a depository of your value system, you know, and we have to kind of remember we don't necessarily have as much of a shared value system as we might think. Value systems tend to be divisive and tend to create difficulties between people. Then there is probably an argument for minimalism in the Constitution, an argument for saying less or putting less into the Constitution than we do. We have a habit, I think, in Ireland of over-legislating through the Constitution at the risk of provoking controversy. I think that was one of the difficulties in the 1983 referendum on the right to life. And subsequently it became a pattern when in 2002 it was proposed to enshrine in the Constitution a bill that would enjoy super-constitutional status in relation to the question of the right to life, which derived directly from the difficulty of putting in a provision on the right to life of the unborn in the Constitution in 1983. So I would, again, in the same way that I argued for socioeconomic rights, I would argue for moderation about what is in the Constitution. Less sometimes is more. And I think that is one of the difficulties that we have in these kinds of debates. That's one of the real, I think, values of the Constitutional Convention, is that it reveals that complexity and it reveals the degree to which some of these things are quite difficult to resolve, and in so doing, I think, makes the case rather strikingly for a more minimalist approach to what ought to be in the Constitution. And just in relation to the specific question I was asked about property rights by my colleague Garage, I'm going to refer you to my other colleague, Dr. Porrick-Kenna, who knows an awful lot more about property rights than I do. He's really brilliant and he's much cheaper than me.
Is that Porrick?
Porrick over there.
Yeah, okay, could we give the mic to Mike Porrick? Yeah, okay. Because the issue of property is a very important issue, and the pension as well, maybe.
Give him pension.
Well, I wasn't expecting to be in the limelight, but I'm delighted to be asked this question. The issue of the upward-only rent reviews, very lively issue. Constitutionally, of course, it's very potent. The property rights of landowners who have negotiated long leases have to be respected. To change the law after those leases have been agreed and executed is an attack on the property rights, and therefore has to be proportionate.
And could I just comment that even in the courts yesterday, there is a test case taken by 3 taxi drivers, which hinge on the fact that the government introduced a change in the law, which devalued their property, if you like, and they're saying that I think what they're saying is that the government may have acted unconstitutionally by making that change because it offended their constitutional right to property. Okay, this gentleman here.
As a retired taxi driver, I have great sympathy.
Yeah, sorry, could you the microphone, please? And again, name, please.
Derek Hamilton, and as I mentioned, I have sympathy for that last comment about taxi drivers. As a retired taxi driver, but I have sympathy for a lot of things that people have said tonight. I could have mentioned health services. I could have mentioned people with disabilities who are not being properly represented through the Constitution, in my view, having a child with a disability. But I'm here actually as chairman of Antashka, which is an environmental organisation, and the piece of paper I have in front of me has me to mention, as my colleague in front did at the very beginning, that the environment is under threat. Global climate change is on our doorstep. It will have an effect, it is having an effect, and it's not as long away as some people may think. So my comment is, and it's a quick one, is that being acutely aware of the growing public concerns for the phenomenon of climate change, I would like to see the Constitution reflect the importance of our environment in future.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I'm conscious that the middle section of the crowd has been underrepresented in comments. So you first and then yourself. Sorry, could we get the mic in here, please?
Tommy Roddy is my name, private citizen. I just want to say thanks very much to 3 members of the convention to come here this evening and to speak, because it makes it more real. And I don't know if you're used to speaking in front of groups like this, and when you signed on that you knew that you might have stood. I just want to say thanks for that, and you spoke very well. I'm just curious if any of the local politicians from Galway that you mentioned are on the convention, if any of them are here tonight. But I do have a question just out of curiosity for the members of the convention, the 3 private citizens. Any of you can answer the question. I'm just wondering, was there much work involved between the sessions? Like, did you have to read up on the different topics, or did you have to read the Constitution, for instance?
Okay. Could Art answer the question to politicians, because it's an important point about the political representation?
There's no member from Galway on the Convention on the Constitution. We have Senator Ronan Mullen is probably the closest, and he's an occasional attendee. The independents tend to share their membership, so they divvy out the meetings between them. But we don't have any full-time member from this area.
And Senator Trevor O'Clougherty is actually here tonight. He's very, very welcome.
Okay, thank you. Could we move, and we'll get the answer to that question from one of them, because I don't think we need 3 answers to that question.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah.
My name is John O'Shea. I'm a former graduate here at NUIG, and I'm here this evening as a volunteer with Amnesty International. My topic that I'd like to raise is about the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It contains under Article 8 the right of everyone to join trade unions for the protection of his economic and social interests. In essence, this is a right to collective bargaining. The EU Charter of Fundamental Rights also contains under Article 28 the right to collective bargaining. And Ireland is also party to numerous ILO conventions. However, in Ireland, under what is known as the voluntarist tradition, that's the voluntarist tradition, employers are allowed to opt out of this fundamental right. My question really is, can the convention of this constitution defend the rights of employees in this country and ensure its citizens' economic, social and cultural rights are fully realised through constitutional provisions?
Okay, John, thanks very much indeed.
Hi, my name is Liam Caffrey. I'm a private citizen. I'd like to see an obligation on people to engage with the with voting, for example. I think the fact that the low voter turnout, I think it's a real danger to democracy. I think we got to get out of jail card there with the Senate, is my own personal opinion. And I'd even go a step further. I would say that I would suggest that there, in the same way as, for example, we don't let people out on the road without a driving licence and their theory test and sufficient training and everything, I also think that there's an onus on citizens to engage in a meaningful way where they actually display some form of engagement in terms of learning, civics we used to call it in the old days. And I think that an engaged citizenry like that would, I think, keep this country from going down evolutionary cul-de-sacs, because I think we're in a bit of a danger of going in that direction, in the way we lurch from one uninformed decision to the next. Thank you.
Thanks, Liam. In fact, that comment has a resonance in a number of our meetings that we had when we discussed the voting age, whether it should be reduced to 16. It wasn't just a simple matter of recommending it should be reduced to 16. Concomitant with that was a very strong recommendation that civic and political education in schools should be much more enhanced. And other forms, when we discussed electoral reform, ways of encouraging citizens to vote and making it easier for citizens to vote, all of that is very much part of what the convention has been saying. We're beginning to run out of time now, so we're only going to have a few more comments. This side of the room hasn't had any comments yet, so maybe we... Yeah, now, Kevin, you were in Cork last week, so I want you to be very brief.
I'm Kevin Sheehan, I'm the Regional Officer for Atheist Ireland, and I wanted to refer to Art O'Leary's comment that we should make our individual submissions to the Constitution. I think it's vital, and every single one of us can do that. And that's certainly something that we're advocating for our members. And obviously we're asking for a separation of church and state for a secular Ireland.
Thank you.
Secondly, I'd like to thank Professor O'Connell and the 3 constitutional members, because one of my tasks in life is to try and increase our advocacy group into a local level. We do that very successfully in government, but we're now trying to do that directly to TDs. And this type of operation is vital, and we think that we can do something to help.
It's a recruitment call from Kevin. Two ladies at the back there.
I was a former student from the Irish Centre for Human Rights. My concern, I really liked your proposal, Doug, about the convention continuing under the office of the Ombudsman. My concern that the office of the Ombudsman comes from a personal capacity in that to do with citizenship, so that I am an Irish citizen, so I can take part in the convention. My husband is not an Irish citizen yet, and I feel that we are discriminated against as being somebody on the front line, you know, dealing with matters of integration and differences every single day. I think that we should be supported as a family unit, and that any of those things that come to this proposed convention shop should the Office of the Ombudsman is not interested in issues of citizenship. They don't take those questions on board. So I hope that that would be included in proposals.
Thank you very much. Lady just behind you, please.
My name is Elaine Keenan. I'm a legal researcher here at the university. I work in the Centre for Disability Law and Policy, and we're just finishing up a submission to the Convention on the concept of equality in the Constitution under Article 40.1 that states all citizens shall, as human persons, be held equal before the law. This shall not be held to mean that the state shall not, in its enactments, have due regard to differences of capacity, physical and moral, and of social function. We would like the Convention to look at this section and making it more robust for people with disabilities within Ireland and having due regard to the legal capacity of all citizens of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We're just reaching 9:30, and one of the things we've actually managed to achieve or succeed in the convention meetings is that we've started on time and we've finished on time. There was one occasion in the 7 meetings that we went 15 minutes over, and I'm not proposing that we do that this evening. But what I would like to do, because there's been a vast range of comments, some of them have repeated some of the earlier comments, but there are certain number of core themes, I suppose, running through this evening. And what we found useful in Cork last week was at the end of the evening, we tried to reflect back to you what we think we've heard. And Art has a brief summary of the main issues and themes that have been raised this evening.
Okay, thanks, Chairman. So, obviously the purpose of today's meeting was to gather up your opinions on what we should be looking at as part of our any other business element. So, the story that we propose to take back to the convention members from Galway is a series of issues. The amendment of the preamble to take out religious references, socio-economic rights, or economic, social, cultural rights, as some people call them, including access to health services. That seems to be a very strong theme from this evening's meeting as well. Also, there were many references to the removal of religious references from the Constitution. The protection of the environment was also key. The relationship for the executive, between the executive and the Oireachtas is obviously important. It includes some aspect of Oireachtas reform and maybe a part of the Seanad, which Donncha expressed a view on earlier. There was one person who was interested in retaining the offence of blasphemy, which will be very useful for our meeting this weekend coming. Property rights came up twice, I think, both in the interest of upward-only rent reviews and also in relation to pension rights, which was also important. So the constitutional ban on abortion, we've heard the case for and against that particular issue. The declaration of office was a particular element of the role of the Church and God in the Constitution. And then the final point that was raised was defending the rights of employees, again, which will probably come under the umbrella of economic, social and cultural rights. So we gather up all those ideas and we turn them into something a little more coherent than I've just expressed, and we'll present Galway's views to the members of the Convention in due course. Thank you very much.
So the Galway voice will be heard, but just before we a few closing remarks. There was a question there to one of you, so could one of you answer the question as to the amount, when each of you are, I don't know which of you wants to do John, the amount of work in between meetings and preparation and so on, and again, pretty briefly.
Yes, we are provided with information, opinion papers for and against. We have a pack, we have a copy of the Constitution, and we're given ample time to research on our own time, using the web, using colleagues, using community, using friends and family. Plenty of time. Thank you.
I just want to conclude by thanking everybody for their contributions, and some of the contributions are speaking and some of the contributions are listening. They also serve who only stand and wait. And it was a very, I think, as somebody said earlier, a respectful evening, even though completely different viewpoints were expressed. I think they were expressed in a way that were respectful of the other person's point of view. And we've tried consistently to make sure that that's the spirit in which we have conducted all our meetings. Thank you for your presence. Donica has reminded me that, courtesy of NUIG, there's a cup of tea outside in the foyer, so some of the debates maybe can continue over the cup of tea. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.